Good morning, everyone. Dan Basse, Ben Buckner back at you. It's Friday, the 27th of June. I hope you've all had a good week. The week started with, of course, a lot of fanfare. If you remember back to Sunday, Monday, when we had, of course, the U.S. attack on Iran. Of course, we ended up in a ceasefire that seems to be holding, which is good news, but we also ended up with commodity prices and energy values that were sharply lower. For the week, corn's down about 20 cents. The wheat market's down a little over 41 cents. The soybean market down about 38 cents. So it's been a pretty nasty week, even with the little recovery we have on Friday. There's a little what we call hopeism that's going on in the markets here today. Is there's announcements that the U.S. and China may have signed a trade deal. We believe that trade deal is largely related to rare earth minerals, metals, and some other things, magnets, and also looking at technology, student visas for the Chinese to come to the United States, nothing agriculturally involved. And that leads us to, the overall thought process of, well, when can we get that negotiation? I mean, we in agriculture are anxious for the return of China. I know Ben will be talking about it a little here, but how that all manifests itself going forward is going to be questionable. Ben, why don't you get right into it? But, in the background of all of this is we got a report on Monday and we got weather conditions across the central U.S. I don't want to call it ideal, but it's close to that. If I were to make it ideal, I'd probably trim temperatures about 3 to 5 degrees, but other than that, it really looks good.
Yeah, it looks pretty routine, the summer pattern, and Monday seems like such a long time ago, but here we are. And I think relative stability in grain markets, particularly, makes a little bit of sense. It's again we've got pollination just ahead of us in the corn market, and weather does look non-threatening, but we'll see. I mean, again, we're all kind of subject to the details of temperatures. I think is the big issue, and this kind of all occurring that the fund positions in corn and wheat in Chicago specifically are not small. So as of today, we think funds net short in Kansas City and Chicago wheat combined is about 170,000 contracts, and so you can see here that just in a handful of weeks has this been larger. This is not fundamental input by any means, but I do think it gives you the ingredients for certain days. There's just not a lot of new selling, and maybe that's what's happening this morning. Corn too, quietly they built this net short position worth maybe 200,000 contracts, which there's room to grow this, especially if we get into pollination and there's no threats. And if weather forecasts verify in Europe, which those are turning wetter. But again, every other day, there just may be kind of an absence of new selling. This is a pretty large short position. So funds have kind of placed their bearish bets already to some extent. But to your points about China, and to be clear, we all would like a successful negotiation with China. That's the one demand driver potentially that we can identify here. But we just think that structurally and fundamentally, it may be more challenging this year than it was in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And even the verbiage, I think, surrounding what we're learning about this morning is that, it's just an additional understanding to kind of implement this framework, to implement the Geneva Agreement, which, like you said, toward the centers on rare earth, student visas for Chinese students, and high-level technology trade. So that's, I think, where the focus is. We haven't heard anything about goods or agriculture yet. And to that end, I think this may be difficult, and we just want to provide sort of some background to what's happening in the world of Chinese ag currently. And the USDA is now forecasting old crop, so 24-25 Chinese corn imports at 7 million tons. This still may be 4 or 5 million tons too high, though. Trade is our favorite thing at Ag Resource because it's factual. We know what is on boats. We know where those boats are going. We know when they unload. Counting all those boats going to China, they've just imported 75 to 200,000 tons of corn every month since October. Pace analysis would put final corn imports from China at about 2.5 million tons. So for all intents and purposes, they have exited the corn market. And on the right, you see is the spot Chinese hog price, which, for the most part has been stuck at about 13,500 yuan per ton. So for whatever reason, there does not seem to be any concern over protein supplies in China. And so that's why I think you get the stagnation in soybean imports, virtually zero corn imports. Grain imports are down sharply. So China doesn't seem to need the stuff like they did in 2018, 2019, 2020. So I think that's kind of the headwinds to getting an agricultural specific trade deal. And these headwinds kind of predate, 2025. So our biggest concern with respect to China, again, the world's largest food importer, is that the population is contracting. I think a lot of the issues in China are just rooted in this. I want to point out that In October, the IMF projected China's population between 2024 and 2028 to decline by about 6 million people. Their updated forecast in April jumps that number to about 13.2 million people. So it does seem like the problem there with respect to population, maybe food consumption, is getting worse. It's not getting better. So thinking about today versus 2019, when the Chinese population was growing, albeit very slightly, and GDP then was above 6%. Today it's closer to 4%. So I think those are the issues. And again, we very much like an agreement, but want to communicate that risk management wise, we're all kind of prepared for China not to be a large importer of agricultural products from the US for another several months, if not longer. Also, we've got the world's one hot spot weather-wise has been Western Europe. It's been very hot, temperatures in the 80s, 12, 15 degrees above normal, real lack of rain. At least today, we're starting to add rain to France, Germany, northern Italy, kind of the Balkan region in the 6 to 15 day period. So we'll kind of watch if this stays in the forecast over the next couple of days, but a lot of moisture issues in Western Europe may get solved. And so these are pretty heavy corn producing areas that could see up to 2 to 4 inches of rain, and all of a sudden the world, for the most part, is doing pretty well weather-wise as of the earlier middle part of July. So again, weather is not giving us, I think, a lot of risk over the next 10 days, 14 days. And also just want to communicate the consistency in the extended range forecast in the U.S. They've been very consistent in allowing rainfall to expand outside of Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and back into the eastern corn belt starting the first week of July. So if this is correct, then everyone should be pretty well watered as pollination just gets going, which again, we think is about July 13th. The U.S. corn crop will be 50% pollinated. So again, our focus, trade deals, weather. Got some positivity surrounding trade deals perhaps, but the devil will be in the details, and weather to us looks pretty good. So be prepared to manage risk on further recoveries, I think, is the message that we've got here from Ag Resource. So Dan, you got anything else as we close the week?
I think you're right, Ben. If you think of the old resistance in corn, or the old support, I should say, in corn, December corn had a lot of support at 430 to 435. That was months and months, and that now becomes resistance. So I would tell everyone that on rallies to 430, 435, I don't think December corn gets much above there. And soybeans and wheat, maybe the resistance is a little more harder to find because we are sitting near contract lows, but nonetheless, selling rallies makes sense here unless you see a significant change in the weather pattern. Even if we get a trade deal with India, Ben, I just don't think it's going to contain enough ag demand, if you will, because there's been such pushback by the Indian farmer that it's going to change things here. So any final comments from you?
I don't think so. Kind of steady as she goes for us. Again, keep in mind, seasonal trends are what they are, and you got until about the last part of August until you see lasting stability if there's not a weather threat. So again, be prepared. Risk management is top of mind from us.
Be well, everyone. We'll be back on Monday for the reports and first notice day against July futures. Have a great weekend and enjoy the weather, and we'll get back to you then. Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.